at a creek this week. Again, I'm not too sure how much of the creek sounds will come through in the recording, but we are here today at Ofido Stream, and it's a very beautiful little stream. So I'm thanking the stream for having me here today. This is Eco Show, a show about ecology, the environment, news, happenings in that sort of area of things. My name is Henry. I talk about a plant or animal of the week, and then a research article, and then we talk about some recent news in ecology and the environment. And our plant this week is kale. It belongs to cabbages. It's a group in the cabbage group, and its name comes from Northern Middle English, kale or kale, ultimately from the Latin word caulis, which means cabbage. There's a lot of mosquitoes out here, but I have better protection, at least for my legs this week, but my hands will be eaten. Kale originated in Eastern Mediterranean and Anatolia. It was cultivated from at least 2000 BCE, and both curly and flat types of kale have existed since the 4th century BC. The earliest record of cabbages in Western Europe is hard-headed cabbage in the 13th century. Russian traders brought kale to Canada and the US in the 19th century, and it was grown because it grows easily and it desalinates soil. In the US, it was mostly decorative. We'll have a cool photo of a decorative kale here. And mostly decorative use until sort of a health consciousness boom in the 1990s. It's a very hardy plant, so good to grow if you're going into winter. It thrives in the wintertime and can survive temperatures as low as negative 15 degrees Celsius. And apparently it becomes sweet with a heavy frost. And it's usually classified by leaf type. So we have curly leaf, bumpy leaf, sparkly leaf, plain leaf, leaf and spear, and ornamental. And there's a rock going right in my bum. Okay. Hopefully there's some bird sightings for folks watching. Other than that, you can enjoy the movement of the river. The nutrition of kale has lots of vitamin K, 3.7 times your usual daily value of vitamin K. That is a great thing to know. I'm not really sure what vitamin K is for, but it sounds important. And it has 20% or more of vitamins A, C, B6, folate, manganese, and many more things. Cooking it decreases the concentration of these things, but is still good. Steaming it apparently is the best way to cook it to decrease the amount of those things. Or you can put it raw in smoothies. There's something in it raw that is not great for people with, I think, yeah, I'm not exactly sure. So before eating it raw, eating too much of it raw, if you've got any health conditions, it's worth double checking that. And here's a few interesting dishes using kale that I saw from around the world. And my dear, feels like my elbow patch is falling off on this. Okay, so here's some interesting dishes which I would love to try and make. I'm gonna pronounce all of these incorrectly, not on purpose, but because. So in the Netherlands, there's a traditional winter dish called boerenkoolstampot, and it's a mix of curly kale and mashed potatoes, sometimes with fried bacon, and served with rookwurst, which is smoked sausage. Oh, that sounds insane. I would love to try that. In northern Germany, there's a winter tradition known as Kohlfahrt, which apparently means kale trip, where a group of people go on a hike through the woods during the day before gathering at an inn or private residence where kale is served, usually with bacon and kohlwurst. So there's a trend here of people eating kale in the winter with sausages. And kale is considered a northern German staple and comfort food. And in Italy, cavolo nero, kale is an ingredient. Oh, okay. In Italy, kale is. There was just a leaf falling, and it made a noise. There is a Italian Tuscan soup called ribollita that uses kale, and a traditional Portuguese soup called caldo verde. It combines pureed potatoes, very finely sliced kale, olive oil, and salt. Additional ingredients include broth and sliced cooked spicy sausage. So there's some information about some kale and some interesting sounding dishes to try up to cook with it. Okay, and we've got even more. They've got dishes for it in Scotland. It looks like it was a very important veggie up in Scotland, and in Ireland it is mixed with mashed potatoes to make the traditional dish colcannon, which is popular around Halloween when it may be served with sausages. So there's very much a trend of eating kale with sausages. So if you're having kale, be sure to give it a try with some sausages. That might be a very good combination. Okay, I was just pausing there to look around the stream. It's getting shadowy and dark. I'm starting to see shadows out of the corners of my eyes. And so if there's any shadowy beings around, I hope that they are not displeased with me being here, and that we have a successful rest of this podcast today. Okay, so what have we got here for this article? The title of the article is Environmental Refugees from Disease in Host Parasite Interactions Under Global Change. Oh, yes, this is really interesting. Okay, so this is our research article for this week. And there may be some trickier concepts. It all may not make sense, and that is okay. I'm putting the session in here because we gotta try to learn some different things. Sometimes I won't explain it well. Usually I won't explain it well. But we'll do it so we can say that we've really read a little bit of research. we can feel smart. This is by Elena Gessel et al. And this week we're talking about parasites, their hosts, and climate change, basically. So what is a parasite? We all have ideas of what parasites are, but for the sakes of this thingy, we're going to say parasites are organisms that derive all nutrition at the cost of their host and are therefore detrimental to the performance of that host. So that's our academic definition. Basically, they are feeding off of a host and giving it nothing in return, and actually are making life worse for that thing. And even though they make it bad for the host, parasites aren't all bad, because basically they make food webs more complex. They add diversity into the variety of species on the planet, and they kind of act as like a handicap on well-performing species. So yes, they're bad for hosts, and they force their hosts to evolve elaborate and costly defenses. So hosts of parasites need to evolve these defenses to parasites that allow them to survive just from the parasite, and that takes away important energy that can be used for other things. It could be used for other things in their life cycle. And hosts may have refuge from parasites under certain environmental conditions. So that's what this article is exploring, is under which conditions, and are there cases where a host can survive a certain condition like temperature where the parasite can't. And that could be related to heat, it could be related to nutrients. In this case, we're talking about like how much phosphorus or nitrogen is in the water. It may allow for a host to survive and not for a parasite to survive. And equally true could be that the opposite happens. So changing conditions may be beneficial for the parasite and not for the host. This information can help guide management and understand the complex things that are happening with climate change and global change in general, because we are influencing waterways by all the different things we put in them and things like that. Okay, so we have an image here, and this image is showing how these different conditions can happen. So we have in the top right, we have the relationship between Ochrophyta and a fungi, and we see that as temperature increases, the fungi drops off, and the fungi in this case is the parasite, while the Ochrophyta survives. Man, there's some juicy mosquitoes out here right now. Okay, and our next to that we have mollusk along with the protist, and we can see in this case actually both are increasing with salinity, the mollusk and the protist. In the bottom left we have an angiosperm and a fungi, and we're seeing they're both decreasing together with calcium chloride concentrations increasing. And we see in this last one a cyanobacteria and a fungi. The cyanobacteria appears to be decreasing. And the fungi is increasing under host nitrogen to phosphorus ratio. So that's talking about the nitrogen to phosphorus ratio within the host. And this is I thought this is an interesting thing to think about, one, because I don't think about parasites that often. And also when I think about different species surviving or dying under climate change or changing global conditions, I am usually thinking about it in the simple way of just one species, can it survive an increased temperature or not? But the food web interactions that are happening are so complex, and parasites really bring out how complex our food webs are and how hard to predict it can be to say, oh yeah, this thing is going to go up or this thing is going to go down. And these tests that they showed, that we showed in this graph, these are all under very controlled conditions. So when you put conflicting situations together like salinity and temperature, you have even more complex things going on. So as per usual, at the end of this article, they called for more research into this kind of study, and it is very interesting to think about. Okay, starting to get dark now. I think we have hit sunset, so hopefully we still have some good images coming through of the stream, and hopefully I'm not in anyone's bed. If I am, I apologize, and I will be leaving shortly. Okay, so we have our news now. We've got quite a few news articles, and let's start by looking at going to Britain. We had a bit of Britain news last week, so that's good on you, Britain. They're doing a lot of restoration-related things, and so Britain has named the first two Celtic rainforests to be restored to primeval glory. And their goal is to provide habitat for many species. They're wanting to improve groundwater quality, prevent flooding, and allow tourists and residents to experience a rare forest biome called temperate rainforest. So I may put up an image of where there is temperate rainforest around the world, but it's a pretty rare type of rainforest. And the most famous ones that you'll know would be Oregon and Washington, sort of the Bella Swan and Edgar Cullen territory up in the Pacific Northwest. There's also some in Brazil's Atlantic coast, and there's some in New Zealand. The locations are, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of these, Craigiecowan in Isle of Man and Gwynedd in North Wales. These are the two sites where Celtic rainforest will be raised using planting and regeneration, so that they can do a whole bunch of planting and little nodules across the landscape, and then allow birds and just natural distribution of those things to occur. And this is being funded by an insurance company, which I thought was interesting. So good on them. That is that. So a nice little story about forests being regenerated. A sort of prehistoric forest that you may not have thought about before could have been composed of 29 foot tall or 8 meter mushrooms. So there's been some discoveries that 420 to 350 million years ago, there may have been big mushrooms known as prototaxites that dominated the landscape. And they're thinking this because a chemical analysis showed that a 6 meter tall organism with a tree-like trunk was actually a fungus which became extinct more than 350 million years ago. They found this by looking at the carbon ratios from different fossil samples and found this from looking at that and drawing the conclusion that the carbon ratios point to this being a fungus, because funguses get carbon from not only the air but also from the ground, so their ratios are different than those of plants. And just to pull together the landscape of what this would have looked like, millipedes and worms would have been around at about on the ground on Earth, and there would have only been small little kind of fern plants. So a very curious landscape with little bugs, tall mushrooms, and medium-sized ferns. Back to the present, a big thing has happened in the U.S. law, and it appears as though cities and states in the U.S. will be able to sue fossil fuel companies thanks to a Supreme Court decision. So there were a bunch of local cases that were suing fossil fuel companies, and large oil companies appealed these to the Supreme Court, so they wanted the Supreme Court to rule on them. But the Supreme Court declined to hear them, and so this is setting a precedent that small jurisdictions will likely be able to sue large oil companies. Let's see, what other things have we got on this? Oftentimes, the impacts of could be spills or things like that are being felt on the local scale. And there are 5 places currently in court that in Rhode Island, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Maryland have sued Exxon, Chevron, and Suncor Energy to help pay for climate bills. This is going to be interesting to see how these play out. I imagine they'll have some strategies for further avoiding going to court, but that has yet to be seen. And apparently large oil companies are less likely to win cases on the local level because they tend to be heard in front of a jury. I'm not sure necessarily why that would mean that, but maybe it's would mean that there would be less bias of one juror or a juror making the decision. Okay. We've got one more news article and then we're off to the races. Continuing on this sort of oil and energy topic, apparently in 2022, renewables generated 12% of global electricity, which is up from 10% in 2021. This is according to an energy think tank called Ember. And there was a small increase in coal burning, which pushed electricity emissions up to a all-time high, but there's some predictions that this past year may have been the peak of pollution. And last year, solar was the fastest growing source of electricity for the 18th year in a row, rising by 24% from 2021. And there are estimates that sun-powered renewables added enough electricity to power South Africa. There's also increases in wind generation, which increased to 17%, and clean energy, including nuclear and renewables, reached 39% of global electricity. and hydropower produced 15% of that overall. Let's see what other points that I have here. There were some fears that there was going to be a big return to coal during the global gas crisis over the past couple of years, but it is looking that like wind and solar are catching up to meet demand. So there was a wind and solar met an 80% of the rise in global electricity demand last year. And coal generation only rose 1.1%, and it looks they're saying that gas power fell by a slight 0.02%. So it seems like we're at kind of an inflection point where renewable energy sources they're definitely not the majority yet, but they are able to make up a large amount of that increased electricity demand that we have each year. So it's looking like it will be continuing moving on that cycle. So that is about all we have for this week. There's a free documentary on PBS and it's by a part of PBS called Frontline. And this series is called The Power of Big Oil. So if you're interested in the ways that oil companies have known about climate change and what it is that they have done to try and avoid legislation, that's a very interesting article to check out. I don't know if I'm seeing steam. I don't know if it's coming from my face. I think it's coming from my face. That hopefully is a very cool effect. So I'll leave you on that. Oh, I see the moon poking through. I hope you all are having a lovely week. I hope this stream is bringing thoughts and good feelings. And I hope this brought some good vibes to the stream. So that's it. And we'll see you next time. Bye.